and welcome back to the Business of Story. If this is your first time here, I'm Park Howell, and I'm author of 2 books, Brand Bewitchery and The Narrative Gem for Business, which I co-wrote with my good buddy, Dr. Randy Olson. Now, maybe you want to write a book and you know how powerful a book can be to your influence, your credibility, even your social proof. But while being a published author sounds romantic and rewarding, it's difficult. I mean, really hard. So today, you'll hear from a guy who has interviewed a stunning number of A-list celebrities, writers, stand-up comics, and producers to learn what it takes to craft your stories and share them with the world. I just got back from Whistler, Canada, keynoting at the Ace Tech Leadership Summit, whose members are tech entrepreneurs and startups in the province of British Columbia. I want to give a big shout out to my good friend Alice Hyman for recommending me, and a big hearty thank you to Kathy Troop, who brought me in to share the Business of Story training with their members. Now, we all attended a Scotch tasting casino event at the Fairmont Chateau Whistler, the venue for the summit, following our training. And while I was tasting a particularly smoky whiskey, this enthusiastic young Irish tech founder, Rory, introduced himself and then rolled his eyes. I thought that was a peculiar way to say hello. And then he said, "I got to be honest with you, man. When I saw yet another storyteller on the agenda, I thought, oh boy, I'm going to get more of the same old story bullshit. These guys tell you all about how important storytelling is, blah, 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 blah." But he said, "You're the first one I've ever seen who actually showed us how to storytell using the ABT. I love it," he exclaimed with a toast, and said he had already put the ABT to the test in some emails he had written that afternoon. Now, I hear that a lot. Storytelling gurus tell you to tell stories, but few actually show you how to do it with simplicity, with ease, and with impact. In fact, nothing gets me more pumped than when someone sends me an email about the impact the ABT has had, making their communications more persuasive and themselves more influential, simply because they could use it immediately. But don't take my word for it. Here are a few unsolicited reviews freely shared on Thinkific about our ABTs of Agile Communications mini course. The course teaches you through 3 short videos by me how to leverage the and, but, therefore narrative framework to catapult your storytelling. That's right, just 3 words, and, but, therefore. And they will blow you away about how powerful they are to build your narrative intuition and make you a way more confident and compelling communicator. So for instance, Julia Campbell of the Branded Content Project in San Diego just took the course last week and said, quote, "Fantastic ideas, exclamation mark. This was a brilliant course with actionable steps to make our communication stronger and better." Kurt Larson, a mortgage professional in Whitefish, Montana, was a little more understated. He said, "I like it. Very clear." Elizabeth Adams of Southern Company in Birmingham, Alabama writes, "The actual examples were the most beneficial, made the concept concrete, and helped me start visualizing how I can adapt the model. The stats on audience growth are a strong motivator and prove the practice works." Now, if you want to put the ABT to work for you, and why wouldn't you? Check it out at businessofstory.com/ABT. Or you can go direct to Thinkific at businessofstory.thinkific.com. You'll find the course there. Either way, you will arm your storytelling self with the single most powerful narrative framework I've seen in my 35 plus years in the branding and advertising world. Heck, I wish I learned about the ABT in the 3rd grade. I mean, it is literally that powerful. And by the way, you know it's a winner when my storytelling training can win over the likes of a very skeptical Rory. If you've already gone through one of my ABTs of storytelling courses, be it online, virtually, or in person, then maybe you're ready to write your first or your next book. Today's guest has interviewed writers such as Aaron Sorkin, Ethan Hawke, Jim Gaffigan, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Judd Apatow, and hundreds more for his Creative Screenwriting and the Creative Principles podcast. And he knows a thing or two about writer's block and how to overcome it to craft your next blockbuster.
If you're brand new to wanting to write, you're going to blame other people. You're going to say your schedule doesn't work because of your boss and all these other things. But then eventually you're going to work out a way where you have the time, and then you can only blame yourself. So you might as well figure out these things now. So like just as an example, this book is broken up as part 1 time, part 2 voice, part 3 process. So the first couple chapters are defend your time, ruthless prioritization, annihilate writer's block, avoid self-sabotage, and make your world small. Those are just kind of some general ideas that are meant to help you just defend that time. And I've talked to so many, that expression, when I first heard it, came from a screenwriter who said he always felt obligated to go after work, you get a beer with friends or do something for the family. Or for me, I used to write at night in my 20s, but now I have a little baby that's about to be 1 year old. So I have to get up at 4 a.m. to have 3-hour chunks to write. And that's like, I can defend that time because I can't defend any time after that. So I had to make the personal choice to shift over. And that's a lot. But if you're brand new to this, just find 20 minutes somewhere. And I think that's a great place to start.
Brock Swinson has packed all of this knowledge into his new book, Ink by the Barrel, Secrets from Prolific Writers. His book is broken up into 3 parts, time, voice, and process, and contains advice on every single page to help novice writers become prolific. To further his cause, Swinson is giving away 100,000 copies. That's a digital download and or an audiobook in 2023 through free writing challenges and competitions. In fact, he's got over 1,000 people right now in April's Prolific Challenge to get the ball rolling on this ambitious goal. Brock says he uses storytelling to come up with marketing hooks for clients, titles for interviews, and course ideas. In fact, today we will explore the idea of giving away as much of your knowledge as you can, because that starts to develop trust in your eventual audience. And he says, don't be precious with your work because it's not your best work after all. Your best work is yet to come. We're also going to examine the intersection of creativity and productivity and how to become prolific by becoming selfish with your time so that you can actually serve more people. And finally, if you feel like your story isn't important, you can use borrowed authority to get started right away. Then, over time, you will develop your voice, your story, the things that will later connect you with an audience. So please welcome to the Business of Story, Brock Swinson. Hey, Brock, welcome to the Business of Story.
How's it going? Great to be here. I appreciate your time today.
Yeah, man, it's going great. I appreciate you being here too. And thank you, by the way, for moving a week. As you know, but our listeners and viewers don't know, we lost our cat, Lovey, last week. Outdoors, disappeared overnight, and boy, we haven't seen her since. And so it's been kind of a rugged week, and we've been keeping ourselves busy with home projects so we don't have to think about her. But I don't think she's coming back, Brock.
That's tough. Yeah, the home projects will definitely keep you busy, but I'm sure that's always on the back of your mind there.
Yeah, well, I appreciate this conversation with you too, just to keep my mind off Lovey as well. So it's great to be here, and you've got a new book out that you're actually giving away. You are a man on a mission. Tell us a little bit about that, and why would you go to all the trouble of writing a book just to give it away?
I started writing this in the pandemic. So this has been kind of a 2-year project. It's called Ink by the Barrel, Secrets from Prolific Writers. It's originally based on my podcast. I have a podcast as well called Creative Principles. I talk to all creative types, but it's a lot of screenwriters and authors. And that actually came from Creative Screenwriting Magazine, where I've been working for about 10 years. At some point, years ago, I realized, oh, we've got all this great audio we're not using. I kind of pitched the magazine the idea, and they told me I could have it and run with it. So I wanted to expand it beyond just screenwriting and talk to all types of writers and directors, everyone else. And we've had some great people on the show. We've had like Ethan Hawke and Edgar Wright, Aaron Sorkin, Jim Gaffigan, Judd Apatow, Taylor Sheridan. It's crazy doing it so long too. You'll talk to someone who's not famous. Like I talked to Taylor Sheridan when he wrote Hell or High Water, and now he's the writer of Yellowstone and basically runs the whole Paramount network. It seems like he keeps coming out with TV shows there. But I wanted to kind of put these together because it's one thing, I'm sure, as you know, to listen to a bunch of podcasts and there's this and that. But as also you would know as a host, like you start to probably see common threads and things you can piece together that another listener or a one-time listener or casual listener may not notice. So my kind of obsession, the obsession of the podcast is where creativity meets productivity. That's kind of something like, how do you be creative long term? That's a really hard thing for people to do. I'm obsessed
Without
with
burning out,
longevity and the
basically.
art. Yeah, that's the big one,
Yeah.
right? And then like so I kind of go all around. The things I'm doing now as I'm starting to branch out on my own more is how do you be prolific? Like what does it mean to be prolific? And that's kind of the word I could hang my hat on with like, well, that really combines all the things that interest me most. And I wanted to take all those interviews plus some outside research. Like I probably read another 100 books on writing from Ron Holiday to John McPhee to Chuck Palahniuk, everyone else, and just put all those together and actually use Ron Holiday's note card method to write it. So every time at the last couple of years, especially pandemic, I've been reading about a book a week or more, and I'll take all those notes and put them on note cards, and you jumble those together, and then all of a sudden you're coming up with your own new ideas, and that's kind of where this first book came from.
Ink by the Barrel. Where's that title come from?
So that's an old expression. A lot of people say it is Mark Twain, but it's actually, according to what I could read, it's from a congressman named Charles Brownson. And the initial quote is, "I never quarrel with the man who buys his ink by the barrel." So in that term, it would mean don't argue with the newspaper, don't argue with the ink jockeys. That's the original idea, which makes a lot of sense because it's, in that terms, that would mean power. I'm twisting it a bit and I'm kind of saying like buy your ink by the barrel. Now that what that would mean to me, and I kind of go, there's a lot of that, the explanations kind of in the first chapter and the last chapter. But I really think with writing and these creative arts, like you get to quality through quantity. So the more you write, the better you're going to get. A common question I like to ask screenwriters, because screenwriting is just step one of making a movie. There's so many more steps. But there's a lot of value in writing what's called a spec script. So if you get hired from a studio and you're already kind of famous, they may come to you with an idea and you're getting paid to write it. But if you have your own idea, and that's where all the breakthrough movies come from, probably the best movies you really love were somebody's spec script, where they have an idea, they write it on their own free time, and then they go around and shop that script. And that's kind of the way things are going today. And those are the things that really interest me most as well.
Gosh, it seems like with Chat GPT coming in, and I've been reading some articles now about actually some of the studios and the writers union, I guess, are saying, hey, look, even if we're using Chat GPT in the writing of these scripts, we still need to give full credit to the actual writer. How do you see Chat GPT messing with the screenwriting world? Kind of an aside, but since you brought it up, that's the trending. Boy, that's the trending I'm seeing today.
No, so I've experimented as well. So I'm also trying to, in addition to being an author and host, I've been trying to break in as well. I've actually raised funding for my first documentary. I'm doing a documentary this year called Daredevil
What's
Society, and the idea, like I'm just building it first, and then I'm going to go sell it later. It's kind of like a step up from a spec script. So I've raised like 20 grand of private money to get started. The idea, though, is the history of stunt performers over time. So from Buster Keaton to Jackie Chan to Keanu Reeves today, how has stunts and genres and different technology changed the way we think about stunts in film? And it's weird because it's one of the most overlooked categories. Like there's still not a stunt Oscar, even though that's almost where film got started. The first comedies were slapstick and guys falling down from vaudeville and all that kind of stuff. So I'm into the research, in that as well. But as far as the Chat GPT, so we're experimenting. Like I have a writing partner. And I'll kind of give you this one idea we're talking through is like we have a loose idea about what if the movie Casablanca, instead of the outside threat being the Nazis, what if it was someone like Jack the Ripper? Now, what if that movie took place in 1960s around Cuban immigrants? So that's kind of your basic story. We're kind of twisting some things we're familiar with, and then putting like a noir spin on it, right?
Wow, what are the prompts you use for that so that Chat GPT actually gives you something back that you can use?
The crazy thing is, like, so we went through this whole thing together, and I just got on Chat GPT. Another client of mine was telling me, and I've always ignored these things. I'm like, I've seen it; it can't be that good. But this one is pretty solid. So we went through.
It is.
It named our story the Cuban Cowboy, and then we were like, put a Tarantino spin on it, and it kind of did a whole treatment. Now here's the problem, kind of going back to what I was just saying, is like that's going to be your really cliche movies. The only way you can do that is based on what's already there. So let's use a different example. Like, what does that mean for English professors in school? What I think it means is that it's going to be less important for you to write me a story about the Revolutionary War as it is about stories where you could put more personal experience and do different research like that. You almost have to think to make it unique. What is outside of the internet? What can I do that no one else is doing? So like with this, I have an assistant who lives in Venezuela, and we're kind of communicating with her to give us just some different ideas about how to make these Cuban immigrants more interesting, if that's kind of our lead character. So I think whenever you can go in that direction, like the internet is amazing, Chat GPT is pretty amazing so far, but it's still going to be pretty generic in the end. Like there's whatever your favorite part of that scene you walk away from thinking about, or that line of dialogue you've never heard before, that can't come from ChatGPT. At least that's the way I see it right now.
I agree with you. I mean, it misses the humanity. I think of it as sort of Captain Kirk and Spock, right? So Chat GPT is Spock and very logical and giving you everything you need to know. But Kirk is the human in this whole thing and brings that human depth and dimension and authenticity to it that Chat GPT is not there yet. Now, our son Parker, who does a whole ton of work in virtual reality, he went to film school as well over at Chapman University. He does his main focus is virtual reality and mixed reality filmmaking, and he has been absolutely blown away by what ChatGPT and other open AIs are able to do in the world. And he thinks it will advance a lot faster and go a lot further than any of us anticipate. And he thinks that it will get to that point that it can capture your voice or my voice and write in that. And I don't know. It seems logical, being the Spock, that would happen. I just don't know how long down the road is. And will it really replace us as content creators? I see it as a tool to amplify our creation, but I just, at this point, have a hard time seeing it completely replacing us content creators.
Yeah, I heard. I think Tim Ferriss was talking about on his podcast, and they were kind of joking. They predict in a few years you'll start to see books come out. And it'll say something like a little badge that says "written by a human," just so you know it's actually from a real person. Some kind of little certificate like that. So that's pretty interesting to think about.
Let's jump back to Ink by the Barrel, because you came out with this, for writers and to help them, get over writer's block and so forth. And you've had this opportunity of interviewing some really amazing authors, Sorkin. I was listening to Larry Gaffigan the other day, or I'm sorry, Jim Gaffigan the other day on your show. That was hysterical. How are you getting this top talent? Is it through your work that from the magazine that you have entree into these folks, or how are you landing them? Because you've got a cadre of amazing writers on your podcast.
Yeah, I would say like initially it definitely came, from the magazine, but now it's kind of like I feel like after you have all these tools in your tool belt, they can just see the rest of the list, So there's probably I feel like there's 20 people I could never get. But that's kind of a really small number. Like most writers want to talk, or they want to talk about what they're doing. The other difference is like if a podcast host is listening and is really curious about, so I'm on these for these filmmakers. I'm basically on these lists. So their publicist and PR contacts me, and from their perspective, they're trying to book so many based on that talent's time or something like that. And once in a while, I'll get a big invite and it kind of falls through because I'm, probably the last guy on the list or something like that. But and the other unfortunate thing is like even in this last 10 years I've been doing this is like the new trend now is almost like celebrities interviewing celebrities. Like you'll see Brad Pitt talking to Adam Sandler instead of having an interviewer there. So we're almost like losing some people that way. But I usually get them. The fun part is I get them for their passion projects. You mentioned like Jim Gaffigan. I talked to Gaffigan because he's acting in a smaller movie that he really cares about. It's not a paycheck. It's not this big thing. But as long as I kind of cover, two or three questions on that movie, I can pretty much ask him whatever I want to. And then I always circle back to writing and the things I care about the most. But the same with Ethan Hawke. Ethan Hawke was doing a show called The Lord Bird. He was like producing it. And I was actually just supposed to talk to his partner at the last minute. They emailed him and said, "Hey, can Ethan join?" I was like, "Of course Ethan can join. What a silly question. So that
Now,
was
I don't have
fun to
time for
talk to
that
him. And yeah,
nonsense.
right. Yeah. Yeah. No, no. Yeah. But yeah, it's usually
What have
like
you
a
found?
passion project like that.
I'm sorry to
What have I
interrupt you.
found from it?
What have you found that you've got these big time Hollywood screenwriters in here and others on your show and in your screenwriting magazine that you write for? What is the trending or the theme that you find that is consistent through all of these, great creators out there?
I would say like the thing that almost you always come back to, like I'll say one thing about the magazine too is like all the famous people get the most reads, but like if you're listening or reading this and you're not already in the industry, you need to be listening to people that it's their first time. They got their first movie made. That's a more important story for you. Like I saw a master class with James Patterson, and James Patterson said, "Don't worry about marketing." James Patterson is in such a place. Has no right to be giving advice to novice writers because it's all about marketing today. It's such an odd thing
Yeah.
to say. So some of those master classes can be too far. Like I honestly even felt like the Martin Scorsese went over my head a bit. But the common thing between the new people and the veterans, the ones I love the most, they'll really just tell you to go out there and do whatever your thing is. Kind of like what I was saying with my documentary or the spec scripts. Like, I'm not just going out there and pitching ideas. Ideas don't really matter. They want to see execution. And even then, you can't really get all those intangibles. So let's say you're writing a comedy. It's hard to tell what your type of comedy is. And then does it read on the page? It's much better to show up that you've got a pilot written, you got ideas for the first season if it's that type of story. And you've also got, it's either called a rip-o-matic, which is like kind of a fake trailer, or you can do like, you can go out there and shoot it yourself, and if you go shoot it yourself, you're giving them more of a complete concept. The other problem with pitching is when you go pitch to the room, you're inviting criticism. If you go make it and show it to them, you're saying, here's what I have. How can we make it better? Not tear it apart and make it something it's not entirely. Because that's where you're going to get like, let's flip the sex of the protagonist and all these other things that are just kind of like, studio to-do lists that they do a lot of times.
They start messing with you a little bit. Now, most of our
Yeah.
listeners are not screenwriters, and they're not. They
hmm
don't aren't trying to get something out in Hollywood, but they are, serious writers and content creators, storytellers within business, within sales, marketing, leadership, and that sort of thing. And we all, and I mean, my whole background has always been in branding, advertising, marketing. I've never written a screenplay in my life, although I thought it would be fun maybe at some point. What can you share with our listeners relative to that creative umph? The fact that, we all get
Yeah.
burned out and we get to the point of,
Yeah.
oh God, I got to crank out another show or I got to write another something or other, and I'm just completely burned out. What do you know from Hollywood and these other great screenwriters that pushes them through that burnout mode?
Yeah. I mean, deadlines and paychecks in Hollywood are always a big thing, but let's kind of put those aside for now.
Well, we
I have
have that.
like
We have
chapter.
that inconsistent, consistency there.
Right. Yeah. So we'll say chapter 3 of my book is I'll make it cleaner. I only use one swear word in my whole book, but it's called "Writer's Block is BS," and I got the whole thing written out there. But I kind of don't believe in it, and the reason why is because I'll talk to journalists, and I've written things myself. When you have the deadline, you have to be there. You're going to deliver on those things. But it seems like when you're doing something personal, it's not the same. It's harder to get up and put in that work every day. And I would imagine you've talked to a lot of people that trying to figure out your own, brand story and what kind of things you're going to talk about yourself is almost hard to figure out. It's very therapeutic in nature. Um, but I think typically the answer is you haven't done enough research. That's almost always the problem. And it might be confusing for some people, but let's say as an example, if I'm going to write a movie in one genre, but I haven't taken the time to like really study that genre, I'm not going to know what's expected. I'm not going to know what the tropes are, what's good, what's bad, what are the tent poles that need to happen. And the same is probably true for your company. You need to see who else is out there in that type of work, line of work. What are they talking about? What are they doing? What are they delivering? What kind of stories can they tell? So it might just be that you're exploring more stories just to find out more about yourself. Or I'm working with some students now who like want to be writers. I've seen that problem a lot. And it's like I'm doing a challenge, like a 30-day prolific challenge. So everybody who signs up, they just get a little video from me every day. And the goal is just to kind of sit down and do it, put in the work. You can write bad, you can write terrible, but you're sitting there every day for about 20 minutes. And there's a quote from Neil Gaiman where he says, you can write or you can do nothing, but you can't do anything else. So you can't be on your phone or whatever. And just enough of that is when the supposed muse will show up because you're there and you're waiting. And I think that's the biggest thing for people to start with is just to make the time to do it, especially if you want to be a writer, and then kind of invite those in. But you might just need to have more conversations about yourself. Now, some people that's therapy, some people it's reading, but kind of figuring out what are your plot points, and you don't really see them, as you're going through life. But when you start to look backwards, they make sense. So I got the job for creative screenwriting. I took action and moved to LA. I was working in commercials. I was working on TV shows. I answered a Craigslist ad, and the next thing I know, I was writing for Creative Screenwriting Magazine. That doesn't make any sense. My other jobs, I took a job writing about the TV show Walking Dead. That was like a $10 an article job. It was nothing, but that led to full-time work. And then that guy referred me to ClickFunnels. And then a couple months later, I was writing copy for Russell Brunson, Tony Robbins, Dean Graziosi. That led me to working with Pace Morby and doing all these other things in marketing. Like I got to basically learn marketing from John Parks at ClickFunnels because I answered a Walking Dead ad a couple years before. Like it doesn't make any sense, but you start to kind of, when you look back on your own story, you're like, what are the epiphanies that weren't epiphanies when they were happening? And then those are the things you want to tell people and shape who you are.
Yeah, you got to get off the couch. One of my favorite sayings, Brock, is F8 and be there. Have you heard that? It's a famous photography saying, F8, be there. And I've heard its origins comes from a lot of different places. My favorite one I've heard is the guy standing on top of Mount Everest. And he just gets up there, this amazing sunrise. He pulls out his Nikon, snaps this most incredible shot, then makes his way back down, shows it. And someone said, oh my God, how did you get that picture? And he said, F8 and be there, which I just think is the greatest little analogy for you just got to get yourself at the game, don't you? Now, one of the things that I find, and it's really stupid of me, but some of the stuff that I enjoy doing the absolute most, such as doing the shows and then writing fun intros and doing little promo spots and that kind of thing, that I almost have to give myself permission to do it because I tell myself if I'm having too much fun doing it, then, I must be shirking on that crappy business stuff that I got to be doing too. And so I will shut down the fun creative stuff and go back to biz dev and follow up and that kind of thing. Is that a weird thing? Do you experience that, or the writers that you have spoken to, that if you're enjoying it too much, it can't be good for business? Is that weird?
Absolutely. So I'll give you two answers to that. The easy one, if you have money, is just to delegate all the boring stuff. Get rid of the boring stuff, let other people do it. Now, the more hard mindset answer, which I do talk about in the book, comes from Elizabeth Gilbert. And if you picture writers, a lot of times you think of the guy in the dark room and he's just tearing himself up. Like Hemingway would say, write till you bleed and some of that stuff. So The two perspectives are the playful trickster and the tortured martyr. And those are the only really types of writers there are. Now, they both get the same thing done, but one of them spends forever. I've heard conversations just online between Stephen King and George R. R. Martin. Stephen King writes 4 hours a day, 6 pages a day, churns it out every single day. George R. Martin, it would take him months to get that same amount of work done. And they kind of represent those two sides. Stephen King is having fun with it. He just writes every day. I can't imagine his confidence level, of course. But then George R. R. Martin, who writes Game of Thrones, is just like killing himself to get through it. I think it's just like a mindset thing. Part of that might be being too precious. If you're trying to write and edit simultaneously, that'll never work. You kind of have to break up parts of it. I talk about all that in the book as well.
Stephen Pressfield, his book War of Art, which is one of my favorites, and most creators have read that. What gets in your way? What's the term he uses in that book?
Resistance.
It's basically resistance. Yeah, and anything that you are doing that is not writing is resistance. You're making up an excuse not to do that. Have you had a chance to talk with Pressfield by chance?
I haven't. I talked to kind of a friend of his yesterday actually, Christopher Gladys. So Pressfield's on Gladys's book, but we went through a few of these ideas. I love Turning Pro. It came out a few years ago. So that was, for his point of view, that was when you can turn it on in your mind, I guess. All of a sudden you're a professional just because you're treating yourself like a professional. And to be a writer, all you have to do is start writing. It's not a big thing. You really don't have to, you can write in private or public or whatever. I would just encourage you to start doing it. And then that's when you're going to eventually be whatever writer you want to be. But it starts with the journey of it. And there's lots of people out there who want to have written. They want to have written a book and they don't really want to be a writer. So if you don't see it as a full-time career, and I understand that too, because sometimes a business person wants to write one book almost like a business card or a calling card. But me personally, writing this book, and why am I giving it away for free? I'm going to write a book every 2 years for the next 50 years. Like, that's kind of how I think about it. So I'm not as concerned about giving it away. I'll probably give away more stuff for free. And I want to leave with value as much as I can. So when I do find people who might want to work with me, it might make more sense to charge them a high ticket item, but hopefully what I'm delivering them is always worth 10 times that.
Yeah. In this day and age, again, with Chat GPT, anybody can write a book. They can go in and fill in the prompts. They don't even have to go back and polish it. And they can call it their own. And to your point, it's a calling card, so they can show up. Now I've written 2 books, Brand Bewitchery, which, by the way, took me like 7 years to write and rewrite, and I finally got it done. Yeah. Of course, right in the middle of COVID, right in the middle of the pandemic. And I thought, well, do I publish it now or when? And I go, hell yeah. So June 1, 2020, I basically got my textbook out there, and then I co-wrote the Narrative Gym for Business with my friend Dr. Randy Olson about the and, but, therefore framework and whatever. But no Chat GPT, no open AI, just the blood, sweat, and tears. And the thing that helped me get my first book done is I took a lead from Seinfeld, and he said that he sits down every day and at least writes for an hour, and he has a gigantic calendar there, and every time he writes for an hour, he puts a big X on it, and when he doesn't, of course, that lays blank there on the calendar, and then he looks at it, and he gets upset with himself. Yeah, exactly what I did here. And I found the more X's I got in there, the more I wanted to write because I didn't want to break that chain. And before I knew it, what had taken me 7 years to get to that point, I was able to wrap up in about 2 months because I had to rewrite everything again. But that was a trick that I found was really, really helpful. Do you do anything like that in your work?
I've done a little bit of everything, and that example is actually in my book as well, and I kind of wrote it in a way. So I'm giving it away right now at brockswinson.com. You go in there, you get the book and audiobook for free. One reason I want to do that is I want people to be able to reference it. Like, you could go in now, download it for free, and if you want to type in Jerry Seinfeld or Big Red X in your search, you'll be able to go back and familiarize yourself with that story. So I've done a little bit of everything. I do find that you'll get in 6-week streaks of something. I use a combination of different things. I use apps sometimes as habit trackers, different things like that. Whenever you overdo it, though, is the big problem. So I think the biggest thing about Seinfeld's thing, like why it works, is it's one thing. He wants to do one thing, not 10 things. I always overdo it. I'll like, oh, I'm going to do 5 new habits. I'm going to start them all right now, and you'll kind of overload yourself. And then that's what the problem is. And I think if you do one and you stick with it for 30 days, then you can start to add another one and some of those things. But yeah, I think overloading is the bigger problem there for people that are constantly failing their habits and goals and things like that.
And now, as people prepare to come on the show, I always ask the question, what are 3 things you would like our audience to take away from this conversation? Number one, and I'm going to just read it back here. You say that you should give away as much as you can because that starts to develop trust in your eventual audience. Don't be precious with your work because it's not your best work at all. Your best work is yet to come. So what do you mean by that? I mean, we hear in business all the time and in sales, be helping, not selling. Give your stuff away. They're going to build that trust and then they're going to hire you. But from your standpoint, I mean, is that what you're doing with this book, giving it away to build trust and then you're going to build upon that?
That's definitely part of it and something I've seen already. So I had an audience of 0, and I had pitched other book ideas in the past, and I would get into the meetings and I would get further. But I feel like there was always something like they really want me to say I have 100,000 people on an email list, and like that's the no brainer that gets you in there. Because as a ghostwriter, I've written about 10 books. And when you show up and and if I'm working with a client and they have that number, they don't even care what the book is about. It's almost like it doesn't matter because the audience is built in. So kind of what I'm saying is what I've seen with this challenge. I went from 0 to 1,000 the first month. That was my goal. It was like I want to do some ads. I want to do this fun challenge. I want to give away a ton of stuff. And coming in as a nobody, I was using something I call borrowed authority, which is using these big names that I've interviewed as kind of help and giving access to all those and then giving them my book away. But there's actually, like, in addition to all that and all the obvious stuff, there's kind of, as a writer, there's a selfish thing there too. And what I mean by that is I'm going to give you everything I've got, so I've got nothing left. And then I have to go and dig a little deeper and change myself and evolve and learn new things and try harder. If you ever heard like a comedian, like this was a big thing from George Carlin, is he would go do those specials every couple of years. Unlike Seinfeld, like Seinfeld almost just had 1 hour of material for over a decade, where Carlin would write a new hour every year and a half or something like that. And that's more common today. But when you give it all away, just give it all away, then you have to dig deeper in yourself. And there's also like every act of giving is an act of receiving. That's an idea from the book, The Go-Giver. So whenever you give someone something, they're receiving it. You're also kind of opening yourself up to receive more. So there's some that you can get a little kumbaya with that, but I think as long as you're leading with value first, it almost always works in the end. It's just like, what's your timeline going to be? Are you going to create enough value for them to come into your world? And then can you keep following up with that? And then just kind of inevitably there will be money that follows that. And that's what I've learned working with, Russell Brunson and Pace Morby and some of those guys. They just give it all away.
Yeah, because eventually people are going to say, I want more, I want more. Can you come in and work with my people or team or whatever? So,
right.
All right,
Yeah.
Number 2, you said, the only way to merge creativity and productivity is to become prolific. But that seems to go without saying, doesn't it? I mean, just work. That's really hard to do. You'll find quality through quantity. To do so, you have to be a little selfish with your time in order to serve more people in the end. So essentially you're saying, say no to all of those distractions, the resistance that's keeping you from being a prolific writer or a content creator in any form.
Yeah, and some of that is like if you're brand new to wanting to write, you're going to blame other people. You're going to say your schedule doesn't work because of your boss and all these other things. But then eventually you're going to work out a way where you have the time and then you can only blame yourself. So you might as well figure out these things now. So like just as an example, this book is broken up as part 1, time, part 2, voice, part 3, process. So the first couple chapters are defend your time, ruthless prioritization, annihilate writer's block, avoid self-sabotage, and make your world small. Those are just kind of some general ideas that are meant to help you just defend that time. And I've talked to so many, that expression, when I first heard it, came from a screenwriter who said he always felt obligated to go after work, you get a beer with friends or do something for the family. Or for me, I used to write at night in my 20s, but now I have a little baby that's about to be 1 year old. So I have to get up at 4 a.m. to have 3 hour chunks to write. And that's like, I can defend that time because I can't defend any time after that. So I had to make the personal choice to shift over. And that's a lot. But if you're brand new to this, just find 20 minutes somewhere. And I think that's a great place to start.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Number 3, if you feel like your story isn't important, you can use borrowed authority. That's exactly what you were talking about there. And people didn't know you well enough. So you're using it to give away your book to build that trust and hopefully
Yeah.
build potential clientele down the road, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of the first idea. And that's really just to kind of get noticed, So if I want to, I'm running some ads to raise money for my documentary is one. So I'm not using a picture of my face. I'm using a picture of Jackie Chan and Keanu Reeves and some of these guys. And they might come in, give me an email, which is pretty cheap to give away. Then I'll give you another video and another video, and I'll send you all the interviews I do over the next year. And all of a sudden, you've got a couple $100 worth of value. So at some point, if it makes sense, and I say, hey, we're in round 2, we need to raise some more money for the next bit of funding, it might make sense for you to give a little more there. And the same is true with like giving away other things. So my writing, what I'm kind of working with people now, and I'm being very clear with everyone that like this is a challenge. It's free. I said in the welcome video, I'm not going to ask you for a dime the next 30 days. You guys are giving me feedback. I'm seeing what the common problems are. But now I'm working with a handful of people to like teach them how to make money as a freelancer, or if someone wants to write a book. And if I don't have experience, as one example, I'm mentoring a few people in this course as well, like through Zoom calls. I've got a pastor in North Carolina, or in South Carolina. I'm in North Carolina. A pastor in South Carolina who wants to write fiction and kind of spread his message that way, but he doesn't really know where to start. So like I'm having my assistant go and book 5 Christian writers I can have on the podcast, and I'm just going to ask them what their story is, and I can give him all of that information. And it also mutually, like, it keeps my show going. It shows value there. That's just a way to make testimonials and everything else, because you really want to do like, I would say that improves your perceived likelihood of achievement when you do sell something later. So if I want to do a course about, how to make 6 figures as a freelancer and sell it for $500 or more, I've already got all this built-in proof and evidence that it'll work, in addition to my own success, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right, Brock, let's wrap up with the top 3 things our listeners and viewers can do right now. And let me paint the picture of that persona, because this is what I'm hearing from people listening, people watching, and my own clientele. I'm a creator, and I might be a writer, a video producer, audio engineer, mixed graphics, gamer, creator, whatever. I am completely overwhelmed. I feel like I'm losing my creativity because there's just not enough hours in the day to pursue it, or I don't have enough energy to do it. And yet I don't want to give it up. In fact, my livelihood relies on it. What are 3 things I can do right now to reclaim my creative mojo and become prolific again, like you were talking about?
I think one big thing is focus on the process, not the results. I mean, that's pretty obvious, but once you start to picture all those gatekeepers that you're going to come in contact with, and they're going to say no and all this stuff like that, like we're going through buying an investment property right now, and there's so much red tape and all this stuff. It's so discouraging. So people can think like that about their writing, and like, well, no one's going to read me, or this is not going to happen, or whatever. If you can get rid of that and just like put in the work every day, you're going to get better, and then they're going to want to read you. So ignore a little bit about the audience best you can. You do want to do this and that, but kind of get rid of that. The next thing within that would be follow your own voice. Forget about the market. Stop trying to replicate things. Don't go write the next Michael Bay movie. Michael Bay is doing the next Michael Bay movie. Whatever you think is most personal to you is probably what's going to be so interesting to other people, because you're overlooking it, and it's easy to overlook because you're overlooking yourself, and it's just like such an easy thing to do. So I've been a lot of people who are trying to write a few things, and they put this one down 3 times to go write this next trendy thing. The thing they're putting down is personal, and they're scared to go do it. And that's probably the reason why. So forget the gatekeepers, focus on your voice, focus on personal. And the final thing is like, treat it more like an experiment. Quit worrying so much about, I got to start writing. I'm going to write like this until I die. No, it's like every little thing can be different. You can say, I want to write an experiment. What I'm telling people with this prolific challenge is do it for 30 days. There is no pass fail. And look at it from an experimentation point of view. It doesn't matter that if you sell it or whatever it is, it's just like get through it. And then did you like it or not? Tim Ferriss, who has like one of the biggest podcasts of all time, he started as like a 6 episode experiment. It happened to work out and he stuck with it. But everything can be viewed that way. It's not such a big deal. It's not who you are either. That also takes all this pressure of like, well, this is who I am and putting all this and that. And, I write short stories, I write nonfiction, I write interviews, I write scripts, I write books, and I just kind of bounce between them. And moving between all these actually kind of gives me more freedom because nothing is that precious. And then I can, whatever comes out of that, and it's pretty good, I'm just going to give it away anyway. So what's the difference?
Great advice. Just to sum up on my end, you had said a couple things earlier too that really struck me. When you talk about writer's block, it means you haven't done the research. And I read something the other day that really, I guess, kind of ties together with that. This author was talking about overcoming fear begins with knowledge. If you're fearful of something, it's because you haven't invested the time to really know it and really understand it and appreciate how you can get through it. So when you said that whole idea about writer's block, means you just haven't done the research. You don't have the knowledge. So writer's block, fear, research, knowledge, go and get that. Number two, that idea of F8 and B there that you had triggered in my brain too is, like you said, you just got to get off the couch and go do things. What was the quote? Someone said you are either writing or you're doing nothing, but you can't do anything else.
Yeah, yeah, Neil Gaiman. So when you sit at your desk the next time to write, just remember that you can write or you can do nothing, but you can't do anything else. Yeah, I keep repeating that in my current prolific course because it's so important to think like that and then be okay with failure. As long as it's an experiment, it's not you. It's just something you're trying out.
Yeah. And then the final thing, again, I was talking to our son Parker yesterday. We were going through Chat GPT and the impact. I've got a show out that is on this week with Dr. Randy Olson, the gentleman that had introduced me to the and, but, therefore framework way back when. And now that's where I started all of my storytelling, teaching, and coaching, is to really understand that 3-word framework. And then you can build off of that. Well, of course, the concern, and we've had a lot of people coming to us and said, oh, your business model is kaput now because Chat GPT can knock out ABTs right and left. Well, it can't. I mean, go ahead and try it. It's not even close. It kind of gets the form. It kind of gets the content. But to your point earlier, the human has to come in. The Captain Kirk has to come in and take over from Spock and bring that humanity to it. So this idea that Alan Watts, the philosopher, said, if something changes, if something is new in your life, don't fear it. Be playful with it. Play with it.
Yeah.
That's kind of what you were talking about, at least what triggered in my mind when you said experiment. Go out with your own voice and go do things your way and see what happens when that, and have some fun. Play with it. So I don't know. I think good advice across the board for all of us creators out there, whether we are trying to write screenplays, we are trying to do sales and marketing, get the most killer landing page ever, do your TikTok video, heaven forbid, whatever. It comes down to a lot of this great advice. Brock, one more time, where can people find your book and where can they learn more about your good work?
Yes, right now I'm trying to get everything in one spot. I'm actually not on social. As I might have said before, I'm more concerned with an email list. That's how I target my people and talk to them. So that's at brockswinson.com. If you go there right now, you'll get the book for free. But in the future, we'll also be updating, new contests and courses and events. But that's brockswinson.com.
That's awesome. I interviewed Seth Godin the other day, and I've got his show will be coming out at the end of May with the launch of his new book. And he told me that he's not on social either, which I did not know. After he said that, I thought, you're right. I never see him there. All of his marketing he does is all email marketing. So you're in good company there as well. So,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
Brock, thanks so much for taking the time. And again, thanks for making your schedule flexible for me. We spent the last 7 days looking for Lovey. Unfortunately, he hasn't materialized, but I'm glad you did here today.
Thanks again. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Hey, and thank you all for watching and listening to this edition of the Business of Story. If I can be of service to you, come on over to the website, businessofstory.com. And if you have yet to take the mini online course to learn how to use the and, but, therefore the ABT Agile Narrative Framework, you will find it at businessofstory.com/ABT. And until next week, when we will have another amazing story artist right here for you like Brock, remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make sure that one's epic. Thanks so much for being here. Take care.